So, welcome everyone. We want to thank you for taking the time out of your morning to join us and um, sit with us and hopefully learn and gather some tips, tools, and techniques to help you and all of us navigate through this challenging time. So, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Stacey Rose. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and psychotherapist in private practice in Ocean Township, New Jersey. And I specialize in relationships, but I also specialize in trauma, which I think might be very helpful at this time. So I have a PhD in educational psychology and a master's degree in clinical social work, and lots of life experience to go along too. So I'm happy to be here and share some thoughts with all of you this morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Stacey. Stacey is the one who prompted this earlier this week, saying this is something that she'd really like to offer people on the weekend. And I was really honored that she asked me to join her to do this. My name is Jennifer Corey. I'm also a psychotherapist here in New Jersey in private practice. And I'm the founder and what I like to call Chief Hope Facilitator for an organization called the Heart Initiative. Oh, look, Duke is going to join us. There we go. Yeah, he's the ham of the show here. The Heart Initiative, and interestingly enough, the whole focus of the Heart Initiative is to teach people who are dealing with chronic stressors, chronic and degenerative diseases, chronic conditions, or other ongoing life stressors, how to build and activate resilience in the face of those challenges. So it feels like I've been in training for this for the last however many years, helping people identify and activate pathways to resilience when you're dealing with something very difficult. And Stacey as well in practice. This is really what we do on the front lines psychologically. And I want to say that although I'm a psychotherapist and I have all of these skills and tools to offer, it certainly doesn't mean that I don't have anxiety about what's happening right now. What it does mean is that that anxiety does not take my legs out from under me. It doesn't undermine me. It doesn't compromise my decision making. And there are things that I know that I have in my arsenal that I can use to really help mediate that anxiety. And that's really what we wanted to make sure that we could bring to the world, was we don't have to just sit back and kind of white knuckle this, but that I'm going to actually mute anybody who comes on only because as soon as you come on unmuted, and then we can hear any background noise. So please don't think I'm blocking you out. If you have something to say, you can unmute yourself. But so that's what we're here to do. We're going to teach you some skills and strategies. We're going to start with a little bit of a background about what normal reactions are to high stress situations, which is what we would call this, and then offer you some very practical skills and tools that you can take here with you. And we expect that will all take about an hour. And we're going to start with a centering breath. And we're going to do that because I don't know where you've come from. Some are coming from bed, but some are running in from other meetings like I was, or maybe from your office, or whatever it was that you were doing, family, feeding your dog, whatever it was that you were doing. Sometimes we think we're here because we're physically present. We think we're here, but where our mind hasn't caught up yet. And something as simple as a single breath has a remarkable capacity to drop us in, to really bring us present to the here and now. And so that's what we're going to do together, okay? So I want you to think of one of those, what is that called, Stacey? Is it a sphere? What's the thing that goes in and out like that? I want you to think of one of those balls so that when you breathe in, I want you to imagine that you have this happening. And I like to say to people, there's a lung behind your navel. So we're going to breathe all the way into that lung. Let it expand all the way. And then when it contracts, I want you to allow it to contract all the way back into the smallest space again. And we're going to do 3 of those breaths. And I'm going to use the sound of the bell as a point of focus for us. So I want you to listen to the sound of the bell until you can no longer hear the sound as you are taking your first breath. And just hold the breath for a moment. And as you exhale through your mouth, really squeeze it out. We'll do a second one. Inhale. Pausing at the top of the breath and then releasing. We'll do a third. Just notice if you feel anything different happening for you in your body right now than maybe you did just 3 breaths ago. Just notice how you feel sitting in this moment, listening to my voice, feeling your own breath. The reason that we like to start with something as simple as what we call this orienting breath is to show you how close the first strategy is. It's right there. It's as close as your breath. And what a gift it is to our nervous system, to our minds, our bodies, to remember that we can actually do that. We can actually just come to our breath and drop ourselves right into the moment, right here, right now. So that's one of the tools that we're going to talk about. And it's interesting because we all breathe, right? We all know where our breath is. But this is about helping to bring us back to a kind of consciousness around the things, the strategies that are right here in front of us that can really help us to navigate. You know, we're in competition right now with all of this distraction, all of this high level of threat that's going on outside and around us. And so we wanted to start by talking about the normalization of the feelings that we're experiencing when we are facing something that is a threat to us. And certainly that's what we are experiencing right now. Now, how close or far that threat is, you know, some of that is maybe subject to interpretation, but there's no question whatsoever that we're facing a threat at the moment. And Stacey's going to share with you a little bit about what the feelings are that normally, typically go with that.
Yeah, thank you, Jen, for that, opening us up with those breaths and the bells and the wonderful reminder that we're right here. And when you're breathing, if you actually would take your hands and put them on your heart, somehow or another, that just brings incredible comfort. So, in talking about what's normal, I mean, as a therapist, Jen knows, and I certainly know, people ask me all the time, is this normal? Am I normal? To say what normal is, right? You know, it's a funny word, normal. And yet there is some, if you look at, we're talking a lot about, reading a lot about flattening this curve with the pandemic. So if you think about a bell curve, there are people that fall into that, the top part that is the quote unquote normal part, right? So what does that mean during a pandemic? It means that, like Jen said, it is completely 150% normal to be anxious and to be scared. And for those of you who don't struggle with anxiety to begin with, you might think like, well, what is this feeling that's coming over me? I don't know what to do with it. It's not something I struggle with. And then others of you might think, oh my gosh, this is my normal feeling that I have every day on steroids. Like, oh gosh, almost too much to bear. So I want to say, and I can't say enough, how normal it is to feel anxious about what's going on. But one of the things that I think is really critically important here is for us to give ourselves permission to feel what we feel. So that instead of feeling anxious and letting the anxiety overwhelm us, we can say, we put our hands on our heart and we can close our eyes and take a breath and say, it's okay, this is normal. This is normal for me to feel. And like Jen said before she started the recording, we would almost worry if you weren't feeling some sort of anxiety. So the other piece of this that I want to add is that I see a number of clients who, and I've been doing phone and online sessions since all this started, but I hear a lot of clients beating themselves up for feeling anxious. And, it's kind of like kicking yourself while you're down. That is the last thing that we want to do. Instead, I invite you, I encourage you to find some compassion inside for yourself. And maybe, just maybe, try to speak to yourself as if you would speak to a friend. If if Jen called me and she said, I'm really struggling right now, I'm not going to say, what's wrong with you? Why are you struggling? I'm going to offer compassion. And yet, when we talk to ourselves, and we'll talk a little bit more about how we talk to ourselves later, but when we talk to ourselves, we're oftentimes not as compassionate. So it's normal to feel anxious. Give yourself permission to do so. Um, let's see. The other piece that I wanted to add to this is I would like to encourage all of you to notice where you focus. This expression that where focus goes, energy flows. I think Tony Robbins says that. So, in other words, the more we focus on the anxiety or the pandemic, or the more we're reading, scrolling social media, the more energy that's going to be brought to that, and it's going to heighten whatever we're already feeling. So instead, I want you to notice, okay, what am I focusing on right now? All right, so I noticed I got caught up in my Facebook feed, and now I'm going to shift to look at pictures of puppies online, because that's whatever it is. So let's see if there's anything else I want to say about that. And maybe the last piece of that is to choose some kind of a mantra that you can say to yourself, and let that be one of the tools that you use. In other words, oh, this is just adrenaline. Oh, this is just anxiety. And this is a normal physiological reaction. We'll talk a little bit about physiology in a moment too, but this is a normal physiological reaction to what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, that's a beautiful segue into the physiological reactions.
Yeah. So I'm going to talk about the physiology of uncertainty. Our mammalian, our primal brain has one purpose and one purpose only, and that is survival. So that brain has developed over hundreds of thousands of years for our survival, which means that there is a large part of our brain that is, without our awareness, constantly scanning for what might be wrong, for potential threats. And this is happening outside of our present everyday awareness. But it's one of the things that absolutely can activate anxiety. Oh, the news uses it so well because they understand the psychology of this and the physiology of this. And so that's why they use those red tapes at the bottom, or the stay tuned next, the worst thing you've ever heard, or something like that, because they know that we have this part of our brain, really the oldest part of our brain, that once it gets activated and lit up, becomes a profound force. And if we don't know about it, we don't even know how to resist it. But it becomes this profound source of a drive in us for more information, to understand the threat more, to understand it better, and then to create a sense of safety. And listen, this is good, right? This is what has kept us alive as a species. We want this. It's not a matter of shutting this off, but it is a matter of understanding it, and understanding both what exploits it and also what we can do to help balance it. And it's not like we've stepped outside of our cave and we see what looks like a saber-toothed tiger, and then everything inside of us gets activated and we know we have to step back and save our family. And that's sort of the end of at least that round of exposure. In modern society, we have 24-hour access, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, of exposure to things that can activate that part of the mammalian brain. This is a danger. How do I save myself? And if we don't have some kind of self-regulating, and that's the other part of our brain, the less organically developed part, the one that we have to build a bit more like a muscle, because remember, the mammalian brain has only one purpose, and that is your survival. So it is the biggest and the longest developed part of our brain, because it doesn't care if you feel okay in the world. It doesn't care if you're happy. That's secondary. All it cares about is that you survive. And so it can perceive everything as a threat, or it can over-perceive things as a threat. And again, this has been very helpful to the evolution of humanity. Now, the other side of it is we have to be able to use the other parts of our brain to actually be able to evaluate that threat, and also how much time we spend on that threat. So part of what happens is when the brain, the mammalian part of the brain, perceives something as threat, without any input from you whatsoever, it immediately starts to have a physiological reaction. And so hormones and neurotransmitters and parts of our brain are lighting up. And all of that is what creates that sensation of anxiety, right? I'm sure you've all heard fight, flight, freeze. These are autonomic reactions that are happening inside of us. And the reason that it is so fast and it's set on autopilot is because imagine if you're being charged by a rhino and you have to think, should I go left or right, trees or bushes? Which way should I go? Game over. So instead, what happens is the second there is a perception of threat, actually all of those thought systems get really contracted so that you only have one sort of, activation in the moment, and that's move, 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 or lay down and play dead, and it's happening in a nanosecond. And why is this important? It's important because we are absolutely facing a threat. Now, I'm not going to get into like the statistical piece of it, because I think what matters is the threat is real. It's absolutely real. But we get to choose how much we expose ourselves again and again and again and again and again. Because I'm telling you, that mammalian part of your brain will never feel satisfied until it feels like it gets to a place of homeostasis again, until it feels like the threat has been dissipated in some way. We're going to show you how to be able to activate the other parts of your brain so that we can reduce. You cannot be on code red every single minute of the day. It's not only is it not necessary, but it's not even helpful. What it will do is eventually it moves us to an emotional place where we are no longer making reasonable decisions. So I wanted you to understand the physiology of it a little bit so that as we introduce the strategies, you will understand the reasoning behind them and how they are of benefit, not only to your thinking, but literally to your brain and your body. How we can deactivate, it's called emotional regulation. We can actually use the more developed part of our brains, the higher levels of our brains, to be able to soothe over that mammalian part that is on super high alert for many people right now. And so Stacey is going to talk about the emotional and psychological reaction that gets activated as a result of that physiological piece.
Thanks, Jen. So I just have this image in my head now of a rhino, and I'm hoping that I don't ever, come across a rhino anywhere. But it's a good positive distraction, as we'll talk about. So we're talking a lot about anxiety, and this is obviously one of the main emotions that has gotten triggered for all of us, I'm sure, during the pandemic. Having said that, it's certainly not the only emotion. So other emotions that we feel and that I've heard about from other people are sadness, this profound sadness, loss, grief, and these are all very real emotions too. I I think that at a time like this, like I said, we don't want to, and like Jen just said, you want to limit how much exposure you have to all of this, and you don't want to get lost in puppy or cat videos either. But there's got to be some balance.
Mm-hmm.
So I really implore you to work on finding balance. There's a little bit of this, and there's a little bit of that. That my daughter and I have been watching a different, like, mindless movie every night. We've watched My Big Fat Greek Wedding and Legally Blonde, and like mindless movies to completely distract ourselves from what's going on. So be mindful of the other emotions that come up. And for those of you who journal, it's such a wonderful time to sit with pen and paper, and not just on a computer, but pen and paper, and journal everything you're feeling, everything you're thinking. It is a beautifully cathartic way to release that which we feel, and we carry it. We don't have to carry it with us. We can put it somewhere else. Um, so this is a time of uncertainty, and some people actually, and maybe you're one of them, thrive on uncertainty. People who like adventure, and they like, just, I'm going to just go backpacking through Europe and not have any hotel reservations, or I'm going to bungee jump. I'm going to do all these different things. My guess is some of us who are on this call are feeling more anxiety than not. So my guess is that some of you are not that, but maybe so. In any case, there's all this uncertainty. And for those of us who need a certain sense of certainty, and as humans, I think we all need a certain sense of it, even if you're somebody who's adventurous, that how do you manage the uncertainty? So I think one of the best ways to do that is to really hone in on what you are certain about. What is it that you know 100% for sure? Well, I know I'm breathing right now. I know I have a roof over my head right now. What can you, and if you can even write them down, maybe, do an exercise every day where you write down at least 3, if not 13 things that you are 100% certain about. Because in that, it gives us a sense of calm and a sense of security. And right now, we need to focus on what we're sure about. Like, I'm sure I'm sitting in my chair right now in my office in my home. I'm sure I'm talking to you. I'm sure I see you. So, uh, again, 3 things that maybe you write down every day that you are absolutely certain about in some journaling.
So
So,
Stace, you're talking about that piece where we activate that sense of awareness and hope, and we're activating a sense of control, which I just want to say, if we go back to the physiological piece for a second, that's the kind of balancing that I'm talking about, right? Because what happens is, when does that physiological reaction happen? It happens in the face of threat, and uncertainty can absolutely be the cause of a sense of threat. And so one of the ways that we can balance that and even begin to really soothe it over is, as Stacey said, if we come back to the things that we absolutely are certain about, it begins to calm the input, the uncertain input that has activated the mammalian part of the brain. So I love that suggestion.
yeah, great. Thank you. So I'm going to read something. Many of you may have seen this already floating around social media, but I have found it very calming. And if you'll allow me to read it, I will. And if you want to keep your eyes open, you may. And if you want to close them, you may as well. And the people stayed home and read books and listened and rested and exercised and made art and played games and learned new ways of being and were still and listened more deeply. Some meditated, some prayed, some danced, some met their shadows, and the people began to think differently, and the people healed. And in the absence of people living in ignorant, dangerous, mindless, and heartless ways, the earth began to heal. And when the danger passed and the people joined together again, they grieved their losses and made new choices and created new ways to live and heal the earth fully as they had been healed. This is written by Kitty O'Meara. So Jen is going to talk a little bit about resilience.
Mm-hmm. So, resilience is, sometimes people have this idea that resilience is something you're born with, and you wouldn't be wrong. The reason that human existence has continued on is because everybody is born with an innate sense of resilience that's literally built into who we are. We don't all necessarily have the same amount of resilience, but we used to think that it either was or it wasn't. You either had it, and whatever your predetermined set was, it's almost like a water level, that you would sort of be operating right around that set or not. So that was what we call this kind of fixed idea of what resilience is. The good news is, in the last maybe 30 years or so, we've learned a lot about resilience, including that it is not fixed. In fact, resilience, like a muscle, is something that can be grown and developed and built upon, even as you are using it in the moment. That's the interesting thing about resilience. We don't often know how much of it we have until we are required to draw upon it. So it can just sort of be this idea until something comes along that requires us to use resilience. So resilience is something that we have innately, but it is also a process. It's the way in which we engage experiences, difficult, trying, challenging experiences in our lives. that not only helps us to connect with that resilience, but can actually be building it all the while that we're using it. That really then depends on how we meet those really difficult moments, either in retreat or in sort of moving forward in a particular way. And resilience is an outcome. So it's innate, it's a process, it's how we meet things. And then ultimately, it's an outcome as well. So I'm sure you've met people who've experienced something difficult and you think, wow, they seem to have come through that with a lot of strength or a lot of courage or resetting their perspective on things, just as what Stacey read a moment ago about, our ability to reprioritize and to step back to see our obstacles as opportunities. And so there are all of these beautiful elements around resilience. My favorite thing, because I am a resilience devotee, and I have been since I'm very young, I love stories, heroic stories, both in fiction and mythology, and also biographies and autobiographies of how people come through difficult times. Because I am fascinated by the human spirit, by our capacity to be resilient, to see how people can navigate things that feel unfathomable in many ways and how they come through those things. It's just absolutely astounding to me to see what we are really capable of. And we can't really know that. We can all have these ideas, but we really can't know until we're standing at the threshold of whatever the challenge or the struggle is for us personally. And the other thing is, we all have different levels of things that activate that need for resilience. There are some people who still feel like, you know what, I know we're going to be fine. I know that this is a difficult time, but we are going to be fine. In other words, they have these deep reserves, maybe based on faith, maybe based on historical experience. Maybe they've already been through some really difficult times and they know they're going to come through it. Other people who maybe, let's say, don't have as much of a sense of what their innate resilience or their capacity for resilience is, might be feeling more frightened right now. How am I going to stay at home? How are we going to get through this? How are we going to navigate this financially going forward in the future? And so this might already, at day 7 or 10 or wherever we are in this process, might already be activating more anxiety than the individual has resilience at their disposal. So I want to say that the good news is we can build our resilience exactly the way that you build a muscle, and we can be building it right here, right now, the same way if this were a hurricane, and maybe I'm not the strongest person in the room, but if we all had to run across the street to help our neighbors, every day as I'm lifting the boxes and moving furniture and helping to bring things in, I am building a muscle at the same time that I'm using it. And that's what we're going to do here today. We're going to offer you these strategies for how to be able to, build this sense of resilience. And the first one we're going to start with is, the need for routine. Our brains feel a sense of safety when they're anchored to something. We like to know, we like to have a sense of expectancy. And even as Stacey was saying before, there are those among us who really need uncertainty and need novelty. Well, actually, we all need that to some degree. People have wide ranges of how much of that they do or don't want in their lives. But we all need some sense of expectancy of what tomorrow will bring. It's part of what helps us to feel safe. And when you're thrown into something really uncertain, we don't really know what the end of this or when the end of it will be or what it's going to look like or how we're going to be personally affected physically or economically. And we lose the routine of our going to work and dropping the kids off at school. And so that in and of itself has the capacity to create it's like a compounded sense of uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
And we want you to know that right here, right now, we can create an anchor for ourselves, each one of us, that can help reestablish some sense of that certainty for ourselves. And remember, we're doing things now to help the mammalian brain settle down. That mammalian brain is just thinking threat, 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 threat. We're like, okay, wait a second. If I know every morning that I'm waking up at 7 and I'm working out in my gym downstairs and I'm going to do a yoga class, the way that people have come together, again, the human spirit humbles me and brings me to tears. But the number of things being offered free online right now, not just this, not just our area of expertise, meditation classes and yoga classes and support groups and recovery groups, and people are absolutely phenomenal. And so, okay, and then I'm going to do my yoga class, and then I'm going to sit the kids down and get them started with homework. And, then I'm going to pick up my phone and I'm going to reach out to people to offer my support, because one of the best things that we can do is take the focus off of here and turn it outward and to offer some support to other people. It really helps to strengthen us when we do that, because it gives us a sense of meaning and purpose during difficult times. You want to create, listen, it's not forever. You want to create a new routine for the new circumstances. I can tell you that in the research on resilience, the people who come through really difficult hardships, life-threatening events, natural disasters, the best are the ones who have something called emotional agility. And emotional agility means the capacity to pivot in the face of change. So what that means now is we can sit back and say, but it's not supposed to be this way, but I should still be at work, but the kids shouldn't be home, but I shouldn't have to do this alone. But we could do that, that's true, and nobody would fault you for that. But it will not do a thing in terms of helping you navigate this resiliently. The most innately resilient people are capable of seeing the new circumstances, and rather than fighting with reality, very quickly adapt to them. Okay, so I've fallen into this hole. I can sit at the bottom and say, this isn't fair, I shouldn't be down here. Or I can very quickly get up and start looking around and saying, okay, so how do I climb out now? And there is actual research on this. I'm giving the hole as a metaphor, but of two people trying to climb out of a hole, they spend all day and get halfway up, and they both slide back down. And the person who slides back down and sits on the ground and says, it takes it personally, I can't do this, this isn't fair, this shouldn't be happening, we worked so hard, or whatever, their chances of survival are significantly less than the person who stands up and says, okay, that rope didn't work, let's figure out another way. It doesn't mean that there's not room for grief. I want to say that, or for sadness, or for fear. What I'm saying is that it is not the final decision maker. And that's where we can exercise the ultimate control. Viktor Frankl is quoted with the saying, between the stimulus and the response, there is a space. And in that space is my growth, my freedom, my liberation. Yeah. So we have this pandemic, and then we have our response out here. And the difference between this activating event and how we're going to come through it will be all the stuff that we do in between here. So when we say create a routine, we mean do it as if your life depends on it. Because psychologically, none of these things are going to be like, oh, thank God Jen and Stacey said that. I've never heard that. It isn't that. What we're doing is we're building blocks here, right? Each one of these things separately as a block is going to help you create this resilient foundation for the days and possibly weeks ahead.
Thank you, Jen. Go ahead. Was there more?
Yeah, well, I'm supposed to move on to here and now focus. So this is a really good time to transition into that, because it goes back again to what does the research tells us the most resilient people do in the face of a life-threatening or a highly threatening situation. And as I said before, it's that emotional agility, that capacity to be able to bring your attention to, well, what do I need to do now? And when I say here and now focus, I don't mean that you can't look out to the end of the day. I don't even mean that you can't look out to 24 hours. But I like to give the example of, I want you to think about a kite on a windy day. When you're out flying a kite at the beach, which is a fun thing to do, if you can get it up. But when you're out flying a kite on the beach and the winds are just right, it's like majestic. That kite it's so beautiful, and it's moving against the blue sky, and it's really lovely. But if the winds really start to kick up, that very kite can become a weapon. It's like all over the place, wildly riding, And what we can do is we can either ground the kite, or we can just bring it in closer, 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 right? I want you to think of this time that we're in right now like a windy day, because that's exactly what it is. It will not last forever, but we're in the midst of some high winds right now. And I want you to think of the kite as your attention. Typically, you can have your attention everywhere. I got to make that call. I got to do this. And you don't have to think too much about it. But on a windy day, what we want to do is bring it in close, 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 close. Why is that? Because the closer that we bring it to the here and now, the greater the sense of control that we have. Can I wash the dish? I guess so. Here I am washing it. Can I take this breath? Here I am doing it. It's not a matter of if I can, I'm doing it in this moment. Can I help my child with this? Can I pick up the phone and check in on somebody and make sure that somebody else is okay? Can I go for a walk? Keep 6 feet from people, but just at least step outside. Maybe put my hands in the soil. What are the things that I can do here and now and today that help to activate a sense of control? Because here is yet another thing that we know, the antidote to helplessness, that sense of there's nothing I can do, which, by the way, is the ultimate activator for the mammalian brain. You want something that's going to send it into high alert and activate your nervous system. It's that sense of helplessness, right? We're not helpless. There's always something we can do in this moment. As Viktor Frankl said, between the stimulus and the response, there's a space. And in that space is where our control really exists. Does that mean we can control what the ultimate outcome is of all of this? No, but none of us can. And by the way, we never could. So if that's where our security lied, in imagining if I do this, 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 and this, then I know what the outcome is going to be, it's always been an illusion, but it's been one that we can all sort of comfortably settle into. Now we're having to face the reality of, even when we do all of the right things, we can't necessarily determine the outcome. But what we can do is re-engage with a sense of control here and now. And I'm telling you, it will be a bath of peace for that part of your brain that right now is probably on overdrive. So it might sound silly, but here and now focus is an incredibly powerful tool. I want you to bring your kite back in. It's a windy day, get it real close to you and be like, okay. And I love this. This comes from recovery programs. What's the next right thing?
Mm-hmm.
Those few words have saved my life during incredibly difficult, trying, painful, and scary times. Jen, what's the next right thing? Just do that thing next.
Mm-hmm.
So we invite you. I really hope you're sort of jotting some of this stuff down, because I want you to know that this is going to be your toolkit for the next couple of days and weeks. And I promise you, this will help enormously. Okay? All right, Stacey's going to talk about mindfulness practice.
Yeah, thank you, Jen, for all of that. So um, the thought I had as you were talking about the Viktor Frankl quote, and the word that popped into my head, and then you used it, was power. That's really where our power lies, that in our response. The truth is, like you say, it's always been an illusion that we thought that if we do X, Y, and Z, that we've got some sense of control over the outcome. And oftentimes, a false sense of control. We've really been fooling to some degree. Um, Listen, if I eat right and exercise, then yes, the outcome most likely will be that I'll be fit and healthier. Um, but again, our power lies with our choices. So, so that's one thought. And really, what we're looking at today, like Jen also said, is nothing novel that we've just invented the light bulb, but instead it's powerful in the reminding ourselves of things that we already know, and powerful to just come together, even though you haven't maybe connected with other people on this call, just to know that you are not alone in this, that we are all in this together. You see these hashtags all over social media. We are all in this together. Stay strong, stay positive. Because the truth is, just being human, we're all experiencing some of these universal feelings. So, if you are so willing, I'm going to invite you to do a little exercise now. And first, well, it will begin and end with this, and before I start it, I'm going to say that given that we're supposed to be social, which is something that we are not used to as a species. We're used to shaking hands, we're used to hugging, we're used to touching, we're used to not thinking about touching our face. We're used to so many things um, that we've had to completely change, do a complete 180. So it's not really encouraged to touch and hug people. So if you're so inclined, I'm going to ask you to give yourself a hug right now. And that could mean just, crossing your arms and just the comfort of rubbing your own arms and letting yourself know, like, I'm okay, I'm here right now, because there is comfort in a hug. And when we can't get it from somebody else, we can certainly give it to ourselves. So that's one physical thing you can do at any point. um, I'm going to throw a couple of other things here out, and whatever tools Jen and I, throw out to you today, obviously choose what works, leave the rest behind. There's something that I'm trained in for trauma. It's called EMDR, which is a fabulous tool to help people get unstuck after they've been through a trauma. One of the things you can do, though, if you are feeling activated in the moment with anxiety or fear, is to literally cross your arms over your chest, and you tap one shoulder at a time while saying something calming. This is called the butterfly hug, and it's used in EMDR for children typically. But you can say something calming to yourself, like, I'm okay right now. And you can close your eyes. I'm okay right now. I'm okay right now. I'm okay right now. And if you don't believe it, you can say, I'm praying I will be okay. Or my best friend told me I'm okay. Or I'm alive right now. Something that you can hold on to. So, um, so we've got the hugging yourself, we've got the butterfly hug, and adding a mantra to it. And then we've got this exercise that is more of a grounding exercise where I'm sure you guys have seen it on social media too, and it's simplistic in nature and powerful all at the same time. So it taps into you using your five senses. Um, if you want, you can close your eyes when you do it, you can keep them open, but it's basically asking yourself, what can I touch right now? Well, I can touch my laptop. I can touch my lap. What can I hear right now? I actually have a wind chime outside my house, and I hear the wind chime right now. What do I see right now? I see Jen on the screen. I see the woods out my window, my yard. Um, what can I smell right now? I actually have a Vanilla Island rum candle going, and I can smell that right now. And what can I taste right now? I can taste how cold my tea is from earlier this morning. But so tapping into the five senses and asking yourself, what do I see?
Stace, can we ask people to do it as you're saying it? So we'll give them a pause in between.
Sure. Okay. So why don't we start with a breath? And if you would also be so kind as to close your eyes and take inhale. And whenever you're ready, exhale through your mouth. And let's do one more. Inhale. And whenever you're ready, blow it out through your mouth, exhale. And I'm going to invite you to think about something that you can touch right this moment. And just feel what it feels like. Is it hard or soft? Is it cold or warm? Notice what it feels like. I'm going to ask you to smell something. What do you smell around you right now? Maybe you smell your dog. Maybe you smell a candle. Maybe you smell somebody cooking something in the kitchen. There's no right or wrong here. Just notice without any judgment. And are you drinking something or eating something? Might you have a mint in your mouth? Do you taste anything right now? And if not, what can you imagine tasting when you get off this call? Might you make yourself some breakfast or have a cup of tea? Imagine what that might taste like in your mouth as it goes down your throat. Is it warm or cold? And what do you see, even if your eyes are closed? What do you see? Notice what you see. Is it a landscape of some sort? Is it a person or people? Is it an animal? Maybe it's a vacation you were on recently where you want to kind of revisit that place. But really using all five senses: touch, smell, taste? What do you hear? And what do you see? And then you can take one deep breath again and open your eyes. And yeah, so before Jen talks a little bit about our next strategy, um, I just wanted to throw out that term analysis paralysis for you guys to think. That sometimes when we get stuck in something and we think too much, it could be a good thing we're thinking about or not a great thing. When we think too much, we paralyze ourselves emotionally. So again, I want you to kind of just maybe notice more of a fluidity to your thoughts and your day, and maybe even invite some music in, play some one music, uh, dance, some fluidity that will allow you to not get stuck. So Jen, why don't you tell us about our next tool?
Yes, this is called an act of self-preservation. Um, Before I do that, I want to say I have I've been listening to music all the time right now. Some of it is really soothing kind of classical music that I can work to. And then every so often, even though it feels like it might be an anathema to what's happening in the world, I throw on some dance music, and I mean kick-ass dance music. And I am dancing like a fool. Duke's looking at me, wondering what the hell's happening. But understanding what the different endorphins that music can activate, especially depending on the kind of music that we listen to. And so we can use things like music and sight and touch and smell to actually activate hormones that then can create a greater environment, a greater state for different kinds of emotional experiences. So think about the things that you can use that are right in your environment. And to that point, this is the act of self-preservation. I'm begging you to limit your media exposure. And that includes social media. And the reason I say that is because if the social media sites that you're visiting, or on your social media site, there's a lot of exposure to more news and more news and more news and more news, I want you to remember that the mammalian brain, the part of you that doesn't give a shit if it's true or not, doesn't care if it's happy or not, doesn't care if you're gonna lay in bed biting your fingernails or not, all it cares about is your survival. That part will keep whispering in your ear, well, just look at one more, we'll just check one more article, we'll just read one more thing, we'll just look at that one more thing. So, and it's not trying to torment you. It is literally just going to the default mode of let's scan for every possible worst case scenario so that we can prepare for that. But of course, when you live in this modern culture, the exposure is 24/7. We're not just sitting out scanning the horizon. You know, it's there on the phone and on television and on your computer and in your social media, and it's everywhere. So this is what we're asking you to do. It is not the only time in history I've ever asked people to do this. I will tell you when the other time is. I'm in the New York area. And after 9/11, I worked with, especially in the first days and weeks after, hundreds of families, hundreds. And the re-traumatization of constantly being exposed to the news was palpable. I could see the difference in the people I was working with who were glued to the television and the ones who had given themselves permission to step back. And this is what convinced me that we had to put a moratorium or some boundaries around it. I'm not asking you to put your head in the sand. I'm not asking you to be ignorant. What I'm asking you to do is to treat yourself the way you would treat a child that you loved at the moment. You would be the worst parent in the world if you sat that child in front of CNN or Fox News and said, I'll see you at dinner time. So we want to do that to ourselves. This is called an act of self-preservation. And what we're asking you to do is consider 10 minutes of news in the morning and 10 minutes at night, but not the last thing you do before you go to sleep. So let's say maybe 10 minutes at dinner time. I promise you, anything you need to know, I promise you, you will get from those two segments. That you are not going to miss something that is so big that, you know, something catastrophic will happen because you didn't get that piece of news at the moment that it was being announced or delivered. And like I said, and this is not a hit against the media, but I want you to understand that the media understands psychology and neuroscience inside and out. They know how they have to present things to keep you coming back again and again and again and again. And now we have a lot of fuel for it, you know, and maybe it's It's different when it's like, and in 5 minutes, we're going to talk about the worst weather that's coming this weekend. And you can sort of see it, and a lot of people can sit back and laugh and be like, oh my gosh, this constant thing of drawing you in. But now we're really in the midst of a legitimate threat. And if you keep yourself constantly exposed to the news, I want you to know it's like your resilience is a balloon, and you've just popped a hole in it. Part of what's happening is we are literally letting the air out of the very thing that we need in this moment. You are not going to find the sense of security that you're looking for in the news. You just won't, or in the media in general. So be informed, and then operate from a place of self-love, self-compassion, and regulation, self-discipline that says, you know what? I looked at it this morning. I will look at it again at some point after dinner, and I will have everything that I need at that point. Trust me, this will be an act of great self-love. I just did a meeting on Thursday night of a group of people that are in the Heart Initiative community that I have. And one of the people said, this was something I had mentioned the week before, and she said, she's a nurse. She said, it's the single best thing that anybody has suggested to her in all of this, because she immediately found herself having more to buoy her, that she did not realize what the effect of getting in the car and putting the radio on, getting home and flipping the news on, being at the hospital and seeing the news coming through in the waiting room. It's like this deluge of catastrophic kinds of messaging. So please preserve yourself that way. And then the next piece, and then we just have two more, so we're almost to the end. We know we have about 7 or 10 minutes left, is meaning. I want you to be really mindful of the way that you're talking to yourself about what's happening right now. So we can tend to have what are called catastrophic thought processes. Meaning, remember, that mammalian brain is back there considering what the worst case scenario is. Let's use the higher function of the brain to say, okay, all right, that's the worst case scenario. Perhaps all of humanity is wiped out, or where it really goes to these remarkable extremes, right? Because it really plays into our fear. But then you must ask yourself, what's the best case scenario? Now, when I ask people to play this game, this very important life-saving game in my office, I have a lot of people go, well, I don't know. I said, well, isn't that interesting? Because from a fantastical or fantasizing place, you're having no problem at all crafting the absolute catastrophic potential outcome. But if I ask you what would be the absolute best outcome, you're stumped. And that's because we've spent much more time developing the part of the brain that can think of what could go wrong than what could go right. So it's a balancing act. Think of it like a teeter-totter, right? You've gone to the worst case scenario. Start asking your brain. If you start asking, there'll be this awkward silence for a few seconds possibly, but then the brain, because it's so wonderfully compliant, will start to say, oh, I've got one. And it will start to give you the best case scenario, the absolute best case scenario. And then you bring yourself to a third place, which is what's the most likely scenario? What is the most likely scenario? It is the fulcrum point between that worst case and best case. And granted, I can hear maybe some of you saying, well, how do we know what the most likely scenario is? Well, this is true, but how do we know what the worst case or best case is? All of it is speculative, all of it. And so we allow, my worst case scenario is humanity as we know it is over. I don't believe it for 1 second, but certainly depending on what you listen to at any given point in time, that's the possible image that's out there. The best case scenario is, boy, we are, because all of humanity is focused on the same thing at the same time, we are going to have a remarkable period of identifying cures and healing and 3D printing of ventilators. And I mean, like, all of humanity is focused in the same place at the same time. We are going to see this eruption of innovation that is going to disrupt this in a way that is unprecedented. The most likely scenario, the one that I go to, is this is a difficult time. This is in fact a time of suffering. We have been through times of suffering before, and we are going to come through it beautifully. Humanity will be in many ways changed for the best. We are already seeing acts of kindness and love and care and support and connection that are really remarkable. We will come through this changed, but changed for the better. And yes, it's going to be difficult, absolutely, but it is not going to be the end, the diminishment, the breaking of the human spirit. In fact, quite the opposite. I'm watching people around me who did not know what they had inside of themselves, seeing these acts of strength and courage and bravery that they never knew that they had. So that is, for me, the most likely scenario. So I want you to consider that for yourself. This is actually a strategy that we use in mental health. It's called worst case, best case, most likely. Even the military uses this. They teach soldiers how to use this so that when that catastrophic thinking starts to happen, as it does for human beings who feel under great threat and frightened, that they have this technique to use. Okay, what's the best case scenario? What's the most likely scenario? Okay, we call this the balancing, right? And Stacey's going to talk about relationships.
I am. Thank you, Jen. It's inspiring to hear your belief in the future, and I am right there with you too. I believe good things are going to come out of all this pain. I believe that there are always gifts with all pain and suffering in life. So let's talk a moment about relationships. How does this affect your relationships, and what to do about it? The most important relationship I believe that any human being has is the one you have with yourself. It is the longest relationship you will ever have in life. It's you've been with yourself thus far, and you're going to be with yourself until the end, whenever that is. Um, so, don't you think it would be lovely to be really kind to yourself, really be overly compassionate with yourself, to go the extra mile with yourself? We get one body and one life, and so why would you not want to be kind or loving to yourself? Um, Oftentimes, and I'll make a generalization, especially women, maybe even especially moms, we tend to sacrifice for others, and certainly men do as well. But um, I see it a lot with women in my practice, and when we sacrifice, and we think that we're helping other people by not meeting our own needs, and that's really not helping them. If you said to a friend or a child or your spouse, hey, get in the car, I'll drive you anywhere, but your car has no gas because you didn't stop and take the time to fuel up, you can't be of any service to them. So really, and it's the old, metaphor of when you're flying in a plane, oxygen masks will fall from above your head. If you're flying with somebody in need, you put yours on first and then theirs on next. And again, so many of us women are not used to doing that. For those of you who are familiar, kudos to you. And if you're not familiar, make yourself very familiar with the work of Kristin Neff, Neff. Um, she is an expert, I believe a psychologist, and an expert in the field of self-compassion. And actually, I'll throw another name at you. If you're familiar with Dan Harris, he is I think he still is, he was, and maybe still is, an anchor man for Good Morning America. And a few years back, he had a panic attack on national television. And being the skeptic that he was, and didn't believe in anything in the world of meditation or Buddhism or anything of spiritual mindset, found himself immersed and in the world of meditation. So he's got a podcast called 10% Happier, Dan Harris, and he does an interview. He interviews Kristin Neff on her thoughts and feelings and perspectives on self-compassion. So if you have access to a podcast, Spotify, iTunes, wherever, do yourself a favor and listen to this. It is really eye-opening. At least I found it to be. So best thing we can do for other people, your spouse, your friends, your family, your children, is to take wonderful care of yourself. That means nutritionally, emotionally, you're meditating, you're exercising, you're spending time in nature. If you meditate, do so, journal, write, exercise, listen to music, dance like a fool if you wish that she does. If you have pets at home, play with your pets, and a whole lot of hand washing on top of that. So another thing too that I like is if you have a creative bone in your body, and if you don't, maybe you do and you don't know that you do, bring out some crayons, pens, pencils, paints, anything that you can do to be creative. So do you want to say a word, Jen, about positive distractions, and then I'll jump back in.
Yeah, the part that I want to talk about is the engaging in awe. Something powerful happens, really our painful experiences are also remarkable opportunities for changed perspective and for teaching. Because pain slows us down and opens us up. And that's what we're all doing right now. We're being slowed down when we're a go, 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 go kind of society, world. And we have this forced slowdown. Somebody described it as we're all been put in timeout simultaneously. We've been put in timeout. And what it does do is it allows us to pay attention to the ordinary in new ways, the things that we pass all the time that we don't give any thought to. About 10 years ago, I was no longer, I had a very serious health event. And one of the things that was adjusted as a result of that is I was no longer allowed to run. And I was really heartbroken because running had been such a psychological outlet for me. And I used it like a medication for anxiety or depression or frustration or rejuvenation. So when it was taken, oh my gosh, let's just say I did not handle it in the most resilient way. There wasn't an immediate pivot. I was in a dark hole for quite some time. But when I moved from a place of grief and self-pity, which is what I went into, there's grief and then there's the grief on top of the grief. That's the self-pity piece. That's when we've gone, further into the hole. It's in Buddhism, it's called the second arrow. The first arrow is the loss, the wound, the thing that happened that creates this kind of shift and this forced change. And then the second arrow is the part where you keep talking about how it's not fair and it shouldn't be this way. And I was very good at that second arrow shooting. When I got over my self-pity and I decided, well, you still have two legs and you can walk and the world is still out there and just move. And I started to walk. I started to notice things. I walked routes I had run for 10 years. And I started to notice things I had never seen before. My neighbor's garden, how beautiful people's front doors are. People seem to give a lot of thought to how they paint their front door or what they hang on it, or to the sounds of animals as I was, like little moles or whatever, as I'm walking by, squirrels. And in other words, there was a beauty that I was awakened to when I stopped staring at what was lost and began to look at, my friend Corey Muscara refers to it, shifting from what if to what is, in my case, it wasn't even what if, although that's sort of that future projection thing that we can get to. It's what was. Instead, coming to what is, it turned out that the world was even more beautiful than I realized. This happened again after 9/11. People remarked about the sky for weeks, how beautiful the sky was. Guess what, guys? The sky has always been there. September is always the most beautiful month down here, where we are, September and October. But what happened was there was this collective slowing down, and suddenly the mundane took on a new kind of beauty. And so we know that awe is one of those emotions that we can activate. It's a tool that we can use to really help build positive emotion. The more that we can build positive emotion, even in the midst of very difficult times, the more that we can access that positive emotion, the more we are building that muscle of resilience. So some of the research we know is that when people are dealing with grief, the most resilient grievers, but grief-stricken people were those people who at the same time that they were dealing with their grief and their loss could also identify things that they were grateful for. My family has come around. I have food. I didn't have to leave my home. Or those were the people repeatedly that we see who have the highest level of grief. The people who have the highest level of well-being, Stacey's going to talk about this in a second, is the people who stay connected to what are called high-quality connections, high-quality relationships, So we know, remember what we said, these are all these little pebbles, right? We know all these little things. None of them are going to feel like, why didn't they tell us this sooner, But when you start to put them together, you have created this force field of resilience. All these little strategies. Remember, it's innate, it's a process, it's an outcome. We're talking about the process part here, building more of it so that we can have a resilient outcome. So allow yourself to see the magnificent in the mundane. Listen, you still have legs that work, or you still have eyes that see, or you still have hands that can feel. allow yourself, if we have to be slowed down anyway, use this as an opportunity to engage in the world more fully and to look with the intention of seeing the awe and beauty, even in the most simple thing. I did an interview yesterday with Dr. Dan Tomasulo, who wrote a book that's coming out perfectly timed, I think, in June, called Learned Hopefulness. I really, if I were you, I would pre-order it. That book I'm sure is going to sell out, and it will be published and released in June. He's fascinating to talk to. But one of the things he said is, children are our evidence of hope, that there is always hope. Oh, I almost cried when he said it. So I was thinking, okay, when you go for your walk today or you're listening, you know, Stacey was showing us those beautiful exercises. Listen to the sound of a child. Listen for the sound of a child. And rather than maybe being annoyed or dismissive or not noticing at all, really let yourself tune into the music of that and allow it to awaken a sense of hope in your own heart. So we can connect with the magnificent in the mundane. And this is such an invitation to do this. In our lifetimes, we may never have an opportunity like this again, all of us to be slowed simultaneously. Okay, Stace, you're going to do the last piece, and then we have a poem, and then it's 8 minutes after. We will be done, I assure you, in another 5 or 10 minutes.
So briefly, first of all, that was beautiful and eloquent, and that's what we can hold on to is hope. There is always hope. I want you to, this last kind of curious gratitude technique, to remind yourself and maybe make a list as well of who and what your resources are. We all have resources, even if we don't think we do. We feel, oh my gosh, I'm alone. I've got nobody. I've got no money. We've all got resources. And it might take thinking outside the box, getting a little bit creative. But think about, who are your people? Who can you call? Who can you call? Who can you reach out to? What can you do that will bring you a sense of calm, peace, and hope and faith? If you're somebody who has faith or spirituality, tap into that. When better than now to tap into your belief, whether it's in God, it's in a higher power. I don't care if you believe in a pet rock, but believing in something greater than ourself is comforting, is incredibly comforting. So your faith, your family, your friends, and your creativity are your resources. And maybe if you can make a list of them, and then when you begin to lose hope, you can pull out that list and look at it and like, okay, what resource do I want to tap into right now? Having said that, there's a beautiful quote by Thich Nhat Hanh, who is a Buddhist, no, is he Buddhist? Buddhist Vietnamese monk, if I'm getting that correct.
Yeah.
And it goes like this. When the crowded Vietnamese refugee boats met with storms or pirates, if everyone panicked, all would be lost. But if even one person on the boat remained calm and centered, it was enough. It showed the way for everyone to survive. So I encourage you to be that one person for those around you. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, Stace, I love that quote. Oof, that is so beautiful. And what I think of those of us here right now you have the tools to not only share them with other people, and we're going to post this video so you'll have it to share with others if you have found this helpful. We encourage you to put it on your own social media pages so that people who are looking for more information can have hope and strategies and tools and skills as well. But I also think we have the capacity, this is an invitation, it is an opportunity for us to be, each of us individually, that one calm person on the boat that can really elicit that sense of calm for other people. There's a poem that we wanted to end with by one of my favorite teachers and spiritual leaders. His name is John O'Donohue. And this poem is called Benicot. There is a word in it, a Gaelic word called carrick, which is Benicot is blessing, by the way, in Gaelic. A carrick is a canvas boat. So then when you hear the word, you'll understand the reference. I'm going to ring the chimes. I invite you to take a breath, to close your eyes, and to take this beautiful blessing from John O'Donohue into your being. On the day when the weight deadens on your shoulders and you stumble, may the clay dance to balance you. And when your eyes freeze behind the gray window and the ghost of loss gets into you, may a flock of colors, indigo, red, green, and azure blue, come to awaken in you a meadow of delight. When the canvas frays in the currach of thought and a stain of ocean blackens beneath you, may there come across the waters a path of yellow moonlight to bring you safely home. May the nourishment of the earth be yours. May the clarity of light be yours. May the fluency of the ocean be yours. May the protection of the ancestors be yours. And so may these words wind around you like an invisible cloak to mine your life.
Mhm.
Well, we thank you so much for joining us. We really hope that you will not only hear these words, but let them work slowly around you like an invisible cloak to mine your life. That you take them, you practice them, you bring them into your being, you share them with others, and that collectively we all can become that calm and centered person amidst these stormy moments and days. So that we can support each other to come through this stronger, more resiliently, more courageously, with more character than ever.
Yes, we would definitely like to thank all of you for carving out the time for yourself this morning. Um, Remembering that there are always things that we can do, and that will bring us a sense of calm, a sense of peace, a sense of hope, despite what's going on around us. So if any of you have thoughts, feelings, questions, comments, concerns after this and wanting to follow up at all, um, I will offer my email address and or phone number. My address, my email is Stacey, Stacey, at staceyrose.com. That's Stacey at staceyros.com. And my phone number is 732 517 1177. Again, 732 517 1177. We thank you. One day at a time, everyone. Be well.